That leads to a final figure we want to look at, David Boonin. David Boonin is going to depart from the mental continuity theory of Peter Singer, Michael Tooley, Jubilini Minerva, and others. And David Boonin is going to advance a shocking thesis. He's going to look at pro-lifers and say, you are right. You are indeed identical to the embryo you once were. That wasn't a blob of tissue back then. That was you. He's going to admit that even his own son, Eli, is the same kid after birth as before. And he's got a stunning introduction in his book, A Defense of Abortion, where he makes this point very clear. He contrasts photos of his son Eli in the womb from an ultrasound imagery and his child after Eli was born. And he says, look, it's the same exact little boy. There's no difference between these two in terms of identity. However, says Boonin, the thesis I will advance in this book is that it would have been morally permissible for me to have killed Eli at that earlier stage of development. Why? Because on Boonin's view, although you're identical to the embryo you once were, you don't have the same right to life then as you do now. For example, when you were a 2-year-old, he says, you didn't have a right to vote or drive, so it's not uncommon for us to assign rights based on one's development and one's growth and maturity. Therefore, why not do the same with the right to life? So again, notice the departure here. Boonin's going to say, guess what? That was you back then. You are the same being. However, just because you're identical to your former fetal self doesn't mean you have the same right to life then as you do now. What grounds a right to life for David Boonin, and he puts this forward in his book, A Defense of Abortion, which was published in 2002, he argues that what grounds your right to life is having immediately exercisable desires. So until you have these immediately exercisable desires, which he said aren't present until there's organized cortical brain function, which he puts at somewhere around week 28 in the womb, you don't have a right to life. You certainly are a human being, you're identical to yourself, but you don't have the same right to life then as you do now as an adult. All right, well, a few quick thoughts on this because we don't have a lot of time left in this show. First, we can question whether having desires is an adequate foundation for grounding a right to life. A slave can be conditioned not to desire his freedom, but I think we would all argue he's entitled to it in virtue of the kind of thing he is. And if he is a human being, even if he doesn't desire such a right, he's entitled to it. We've pointed out before that children may not desire good nutrition or a good education, but they're still entitled to them in virtue of the kind of thing they are. You could also think of somebody who might have an accident. Say, I'm working with a staple gun and I accidentally shoot myself in the head with it instead of nailing that 2x4 stud the way I needed to. Suppose it damages my brain and damages the part of the brain where I have desires. Does that mean I lose my right to life because I no longer desire anything due to that injury? Or you might envision a case, to borrow an example from my friend Frank Beckwith, where a doctor surgically alters the brain of a developing fetus so it never develops desires at all. Now assume that child at age 5 is killed so his bodily organs can be used to treat disease in others. And the argument would be, well, he didn't desire to go on living because he had his brain altered, so no wrong was done. I think we can see how horrific this would be. I think, too, you could think of somebody who achieves nirvana. They become so stoic in their view that they don't desire anything. Do they cease to be persons with a right to life? These are some challenging things that go with Boonin's thinking. Again, it's vital you as a pro-lifer know how to engage these people.